Okay, and we are live. Good evening, London, and welcome to Startup Grind. Another Startup Grind. This is the January edition 2022. And we are very pleased to have a diversity talk this evening, hosted by our very own Gary Stewart, who has been with us so many times, always fantastic moderator. And we have two special guests who's gonna talk about diversity and inclusion in investing in VC. We have a super successful entrepreneur and very privileged to have recently awarded a special award, but Ezechi here from Social ImpactX. So Gary, I don't want to take any more of your time because we're already running late a few minutes. So please, the stage is yours.
All right, awesome. So yeah, let me introduce myself. My name is Gary Stewart, and I am the founder and CEO of FounderTribes, which is an app to help founders access mentors and investors, regardless of what background they come from. And so yeah, the idea is to kind of get people to pay it forward and help one another so we can all build an amazing ecosystem. And it's not only for people who want to be unicorns, it's for any founder of any background. And so that's why I'm super excited to have two super founders as well as investors who are going to spend the next, hour or so maybe with me. So first of all, Ez, again, congratulations on the MBE for Services to Diversity and Young People. I wrote it down. So that's awesome and well-deserved. And then Tevin, we know you also have a whole bunch of awards, most recently the Power List, and I looked at your LinkedIn, you were on Sky, BBC, so you're also doing your stuff. And as you said, you're somewhere between Lagos and Accra right now, so you're also international man of mystery. But I'm not going to do too much of the talk. Maybe start by allowing each of you to do your 1-minute pitches. So let's start with Ez and talk about your history, maybe from starting in banking to going to Neyber to Code Untapped and ImpactX. Like, yeah, who are you?
In 1 minute? That's not like a whole talk. Okay, very quick version. So I'm Ezechi, Britton, or Ez, as most people know me. I started off in investment banking technology. I was a programmer back at Lehman Brothers in credit derivatives, risk and pricing technology. I left there, joined Credit Suisse, and moved to Switzerland. Spent 5 years out there working in equity derivatives, risk and pricing tech. So 10 years in FinTech before we called it FinTech. I then actually moved back to the UK back in 2014 and co-founded a FinTech called Neyber. I was one of the founding members and the original CTO for the organization. That was a company that specialized in salary deducted lending to UK-based employees. We bootstrapped that from zero, and most notably, we raised about £200 million. We lent out over 170 million. And at the time, we were Goldman Sachs' largest investment in UK fintech. I left Neyber a number of years ago, so I'm focusing much more on the social impact side of things. I launched an organization called Code Untapped, which was very much around giving diverse technologists a voice and a platform, and is focused on upskilling and incubating great startups and great technologists. And then I also joined ImpactX Capital, where I'm one of the founding members, principal investor alongside Yvonne Bajella, and I'm the CTO in residence for the fund. So I've got the longest title out of everyone in the group. And at ImpactX, what we do is we invest in diverse and underrepresented entrepreneurs. And when we say diverse and underrepresented, we mean by virtue of venture capital allocation. So we know that historically 96% of funding has gone to all white male founding teams. So we're looking at everybody else. You know, that missing 4% actually makes up 57% of the population. So that's me and that's us. Thank you.
Great. Almost a minute, but we're gonna good. You had a lot to cover. All right. So Tevin, I think you're almost kind of like even more unique, at least in my world, because you're the kind of like traditional entrepreneur who's kind of then kind of blown up, right? So you have like a cutting edge logistics company that has been described as the leading independently owned food organization. You deliver 21 million food items on behalf of clients like Tesco in Iceland. I don't know if you're blushing, that's why the camera went off. Tesco in Iceland, the UK, and Iceland in the UK, South America, and Africa. You have subsidiaries. So it's, I mean, like a real thing. Platebox and some other companies that deliver almost 10 million school meals across the UK. You've been on the Powerless, like I mentioned before. You have a foundation, okay? And you also have a scholarship program set up. So I've given a little bit of a taste, but how would you describe yourself and your career in a minute or so, we'll say?
Brilliant. So I'll start from the very early. So the very interesting thing about me is that I started my first business at age 21. And I think within 6 months, I'd already made about £1 million. And I just thought, you know what, this might be the right way. So and I decided to go into design and build. So I think from a very early stage, I kind of knew that there might be a separation between what you studied and what your idea is. And then eventually I sold that business. Then I founded another business. But what I think was interesting is that at such a young age, I thought, okay, a really large-scale business, and how do I do that without being the person that's constantly in the middle of it? So I thought, okay, I would sell the design and build, then I would start up. About 20 years ago, I realized that actually technology was going to play a huge role in our day-to-day life. So I came up with an idea that a B2B last mile logistics that focused on using technology to create efficiency was going to be the way forward. What you now have is, of course, you have so many of us in this space. We focus purely on multinationals, B2B industry. So we work across B&I industries, oil and gas, support services, infrastructure, remote locations, schools and government. And then I've kind of just gone to where we are now, where actually we're one of the largest in the industry. We have a huge, well-known reputation across the industry for being really focused onto detail, using a lot of technology, focusing on sustainability, more importantly, to try to kind of drive the efficiency that's needed in the industry.
One of the things I find really interesting when I was reading up both of your stories is that you both kind of like stumbled into entrepreneurship. So as you say, I think the quote says, you said, I attended, and I think it was brave of you and honest and like really useful. You said, I attended a very poor secondary school, and as a result, I didn't do well in my A-levels, had to resit them. And then somehow you ended up at Lehman Brothers. And then, you know, so tell us a little bit about like, so how did that happen? Because I guess there are a lot of other kids out there that might be like, okay, I don't look like this pattern that everyone is saying. I didn't go to Eton. I didn't go to Oxford. You know, whatever. How did it happen? What's the lesson there?
So I'm glad to bring it up because it's a really important part of the story. It's one of the things that I like to talk about actually, because I think it's important that people like us see that these stories are possible, you know. So I grew up in Southeast London. My parents were both teachers, but you know, the schools in Southeast London, unless you go to a private school, aren't particularly good, right? So the school I went to, the 5 A to C pass rate at GCSE was 14%, and that's 1-4, not 4-0. So the chances of being successful in my school were woeful, right? I mean, really, really bad. But what that meant was you didn't learn, the learning mentality wasn't there. The studying mentality wasn't there because your peer group didn't have it. You passed your GCSEs because you were smart, not because you studied, right? And that was about it. So what that then meant was when I went into my A-levels, that whilst I was a smart kid, I didn't have that learning habit. So you can't just talk your way through your A-levels. You actually have to study, you have to practice. And I was doing maths, physics, and computer science, right? You can't bluff your way through even at A-level. So I failed, right? Failed out hard. And I then had to make a decision. Do I accept this as my life, or do I make the decision to spend a bit more time, reapply myself, study harder, and go to a university that I actually wanted to go to? So that's what I did. So I basically talked my way back into my A-levels. They agreed to let me resit them. I did okay. I didn't do amazingly because I was still fairly distracted by other things, typically martial arts and this, that, and the other. But then I realized I had a poor educational track record, and I wanted to get into programming and technology, right? And in order to do that, your educational track record completely determines which level of job could you go into back then. Now it's a little bit different, but back when I was there, it was critical. So I chose a university that had a year in industry because I felt it'd be easier to get an industrial placement than an actual job. And that would start to course correct for my poor educational track record. even doing that, I was still one of the last in my year. So it's at the end of your second year that you have to get that placement to get a job. I was one of the last three. But I was fortunate enough that it was Lehman Brothers who decided to give me a shot at coming in as an intern. But I was lucky because by that point, I'd really learned to reapply myself, right? I studied hard. I was doing great in my course and my degree. And because I was it was right at the tail end of that year, it was just before I was doing my exams. I actually knew more about any other point. But I completely applied myself to learning everything I could about the banking world. And that evening, they gave me a job. Literally, I went in, had the interview, and they offered me the role that night. And since then, I've never really looked back. So that was the journey about how me, failing my A-levels, managed to get into the investment banking space. But I mean, that day was fascinating because think about this, I'd never been in that environment in my life. I didn't have a good suit. I didn't have good clothing. I turned up to this interview in Liverpool Street, so Moorgate Circle, on the trading floor, wearing a badly fitted black suit, a black shirt, and a silver tie, thinking, fantastic. Walking across this trade, they must have been thinking, who is this kid? What on earth? What is happening right now? But I was able to really knock it out of the park during the interview, and that set me up.
Awesome story. And I don't know, Tevin, what's your origin story?
It's incredible that Ez was just talking about Southeast London, because that's where I'm from too. I grew up in Southeast London, but you know what's unique about Southeast London? I think it does something to teach you on how you truly survive the terrain of either business or work environment. Funny, some of your stories as just I relate literally. It's like me telling the story. I come from the exact same background, and I think what happened to me was that I'd gone to college outside my environment was when I kind of started to think very differently, because then that wasn't South London, that taken me to West London. So I started to kind of break that local kind of mindset. I actually was going to study medicine. When I kind of realized that I've got to get my act together, then I decided, what am I do? I do biomedical sciences. So when I graduated biomedical sciences, I thought I kind of hated science, and I thought I was going to go into business. I very early started to realize that I might have a knack for business. And I just started thinking about different ideas. So one of the things I did constantly was I listened to the news constantly. So I was very, very on the ball about things that were happening. I could kind of make informed decisions on what I think trends will be. And so the government, this was quite an interesting story that I don't think I've ever told a lot of people, changed how they were going to fund schools. So what used to happen is the government used to give the money to local authorities, and the schools would go to local authorities. But then I think it was the Labour government said, no, actually, we'll give the money to the schools directly. So I came up with an idea that actually, if I created a one-stop shop service business that would approach the schools directly, then they have the control of their budget. And that's how my first business was born. But what I then started to see is I started to see other opportunities of how I grow my portfolio. Probably one of my biggest strengths is the ability to kind of see trend, make a beeline for it, and just go for it. And that's probably why the startup thing really relates to me, because I come up with an idea and I'm just relentless in the pursuit of that, and I just go for it. Yes, you will never always win these things, but losses as experience. So even when you lose, you win. Across some kind of, a reverend of some. Actually, even when I was making mistakes, I was learning how not to make it again, and that probably even to this day. Going up, people in my office would know and say, do you know what? I've got an idea. I think this, and before you know it, we're literally steamrolling a new. So I think for me, London is probably giving me that kind of die-hard attitude to say, do you know what? I'm going to do whatever it takes to win, and I'll be focused in my pursuit of whatever that version of success is.
Awesome. So I'm going to be hopefully not too controversial here. I'm just going to ask a pointed question, which is like, as you made the statement, I think I have it here somewhere in my notes, that, you know, some of us just really aren't allowed to fail. Like failure is almost like the luxury of people that have a social safety net, right? Mommy and daddy can take care of you, or you have enough money in the bank, whatever the case may be. Or you went to a certain school, so you have a network, you're always going to be able to kind of like fall upward, right?
Yeah.
And then I guess you guys are both saying, or Tevin, you're saying, but you know, like failure is, you can learn from it. What I've seen is like, there are lots of like minorities who are like, listen, my life is tough enough. If I could just get like a stable job, you know, I'm already kind of cool. So what was it about you guys that kind of made you say, okay, listen, I've had to struggle to get to this point. You know, you're on your way, Tevin, to becoming a doctor. As you know, you're at like Lehman Brothers, you've made it. And then you're like, screw that. I just kind of want to go risk it all and be an entrepreneur. What was the motivation there? Can you help us understand?
That freedom to fail piece, you know, I talk about this quite a lot, right? And I think this is a real issue with the social contract that we have in this country, which is that ability to make a mistake and choose a pathway, get it wrong and start again, is what enables certain demographics to just continue to accelerate. For the rest of us, it's a real risky decision to make that change, even when we have failed, right? Some of us just end up stuck on that pathway and there's no way off of it. It's really interesting because there are certain industries that actually thrive on failure, which we're almost cut out of. We did a workshop with Google last summer talking about the road to Google and becoming a Google engineer. It was a really interesting thing that came out of that conversation, is that most Google engineers fail in their first attempt to get into Google, right? They expect you to retry over and over again and learn from the process of trying to get a role there. There are engineers at Google who had to try 7 times to get in, right? But that instantly cuts off a huge percentage of our population, people who A, probably wouldn't think about applying to Google in the first place, B, certainly wouldn't try to apply a second time, right? So it's just one of these things that it's so high risk for us to fail that many of us just don't even take the risk in the first place. And I think a big thing for me, and Tevin mentioned it, was stepping out of that environment, right? So I left Southeast London, went to university down at Canterbury in Kent. My dad was adamant, you leave London and you go somewhere else when you go to university. And that exposure to different people, different ways of thinking, really important actually. All of a sudden my mind was open to going traveling, going snowboarding, doing all these other crazy things. And I remember telling my mum I wanted to spend a year and do a gap year. Black kids from Southeast London don't go and do a gap year, right? Especially if they got Nigerian. I literally had uncles ringing up saying, Eze, what is this nonsense about you taking a gap year? You know, why don't you want to work? Why don't you want to get a job, right? It was relentless. But there's an aspect to our society that requires us to just go get comfortable and earn, right? And stepping out of that, failing is a bad thing, right? And being able to actually take that on and go, you know what? I might fail. But exactly as Tevin said, failure will teach me a lesson, right? And from that, I'll get stronger and do better. You know, in tech, we talk about fail fast, right? That mindset is something that just has to be adopted if you're going to take this pathway. So for me, it was never even a question. I knew I might fail, but I was willing to take that bet on myself, right? And, you know, hopefully examples like us will lead to more people doing that.
I mean, for me, I think there are different approaches to it. So I will tell you a little thing that happened to me. So when I decided I was going to set my business up at the very early stages, I remember going for funding and being turned down. And I think that at that point, failure wasn't just about money. It was about maybe actually you start to second guess if this was a good idea in the first place. Because here you are, a young 21-year-old, you see this grown up saying that they're not really going to fund this idea. So it wasn't just about money. But I think what I learned very early at that stage was that you had to have complete conviction in whatever you were going to do. So I think the bit that I would add to what Ez is saying is that we probably need to talk about people having true conviction. Nobody makes business is not something you go for. It's a group of very chosen people. It's the most ultimate thing that you can decide to do against the grain of every single thing that might make sense to you. And I think actually what we need to start talking to people is to understand you're in a people. And what that means is you would go through trials and tribulations. You will go through challenging periods. You will go through periods where people will tell you this would never work. But you must also that if they knew it would work, they would already have the idea. And I think that principle is one thing I've always held on to. The irony is ended up working for me. So that's how much they knew. So the thing sometimes idea might be so far ahead of the people you're talking to. Probably one of the things that we need to kind of get people to be very aligned. The desire, the ultimate love for what you're trying to do, and looking through it to make sure that actually, do you know what? I got no because I need to tweak that. And I think Ez was talking about when you go to Google to turn you down, is the constant pursuit of that goal. You keep tweaking until you make the perfect product. There's no business. Look, I always have arguments with people when they say, go and read this book and go and read that book. And I say to them, the truth is, business is about instinct. Business is about the ability to trust one's instinct to do the right thing and make the right decision at any given time. Because the truth is, anyone can walk into my office. I don't know what they're going to ask me. I don't know what problem they're going to bring to me. But I have to have an answer. I'm not a genius, but I trust my instinct that whatever I say to you, hopefully we'll get the right answer. And I think that's probably what people need to be focused on and believe in, that actually I'm doing this because I believe in what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to tweak it till I make that perfect product. So I think for me, there's probably many different answers to this, but it's much more deeply about one's self-belief in the idea in the first place.
So I'm gonna throw out some nuanced questions again, because on the one hand, I was listening to this these investors the other day talking, and they were like, oh, we have to be chasing alpha, but everyone is chasing beta. So I guess it's just a way of saying you want to go after the one that's doing something that no one's looking for, rather than chasing the one that everyone's kind of going after, or the trend that everyone's going after. So I kind of bought into that because I think of myself more as alpha than beta, but maybe that's just like my craziness. But then the second bit I was thinking though is, but we want more people of color, more women, more lower socioeconomic folks to kind of get into entrepreneurship, right? Because working for someone is great. There's nothing wrong with it. But the way to create real wealth is by owning equity in a business or whatever. As Beyonce said in what's Pay Me in Equity, right? That's how a lot of these rappers are kind of getting to the next level, not by playing on a basketball team or singing. It's like owning the means of production. So how do we kind of move it so that, or what can we do so that we can democratize entrepreneurship so that more people who don't have this kind of alpha mentality are also able to benefit from entrepreneurship, creating wealth in their own communities or for their families?
I love that idea of chasing alpha. I just wanted to touch on that because they say they want to chase alpha, not beta, but then they target the same group of people every time, right? 96% of funding goes to this group of people, and we know that 60% of startups fail year on year. So that seems to me to be a failing model. Right? It always boggles my mind. It's controversial to say this, but the challenge we have is that we're always searching for those unicorns, right? We're always searching for those decacorns and the rest. And ImpactX is the same, but that's because that's what the LPs want, right? And that's what you have to sell on. I would love to see people in the community starting startups, exiting earlier, exiting with like maybe 10, 20 million, build up, exit, and let's start building that pool of capital, that reserve of capital within the community. And then let's start getting some actual high net worth angels within our group who can then fund that next generation of unicorns, decacorns, and the rest of it. So I think there needs to be a stepping stone at the moment because we're still trying to get the same pool of LPs who are typically investing in the same group of white fund managers who are targeting the same group of people, and we're trying to get them to invest in black people, right? And it's not working, right? Let's be clear about this. We've made great strides at ImpactX, but we're still raising our fund. Cornerstone still raising their fund. 10 by 10 VC still raising their fund. There's a gap, right, in this space, and I think there's a need to start filling that gap by bringing entrepreneurial-minded people from our community up through the levels, so that we can then leapfrog all of these other individuals. So you know what, we don't need you right now. We'll just do this ourselves. That's what I'd love to see.
So you're making me think about a conversation I was having with a friend of mine in the US. I'm not going to say which institution or what she does, but she was basically saying she loves America right now because there are enough Black people with money so that when someone comes in and says, I need you to do X, Y, and Z if you want my money, they're like, that's okay. I can kind of go somewhere else. You have optionality now. And I think that I haven't seen that in the UK. I think that's right. I'm going to ask you one follow-up question, then go to Tevin, which the question for you is, so why do you think they're not giving the funding to Black fund managers? I mean, Paula, who works with you, came to speak at my class, and I said to her, okay, so Eric went to Harvard and Princeton, I think, and you went to Stanford and Harvard. You have all of the credentials, you've worked in the right places, et cetera, but yet there are people who have none of this experience who are getting loads of funding left and right. So what do you think is really going on?
I think they're doing this. Look, when investors invest in startups, the hidden secret is the social capital. I think we've lost Tevin. The hidden piece is always the social capital, right? There's a fact. It's very simple. Your professional network is the #1 indicator of success, right? It just is. Right, in any field. And when investors look at startup founders, they look at their network, and that network enables them to think, okay, can you find good talent? Can you get into organizations, and can you raise money? That's the metric that they go by. And that's why you get the same group of people invested in. And you see the same thing happening when they're investing in fund managers as well, right? They're making the same calculation. Now, what you have to ask is, given the clear network that we have, right, whether it's through myself, whether it's through Eric, Paula, our founding membership team between itself, it's literally like the who's who of Black entrepreneurs, senior leaders, right? Do these LPs value those networks and those connections that we have? Do they believe in them? Do they trust in them? Because exactly as you said, I'm seeing people launching funds without the track record. We've got a unicorn in our portfolio within the last 3 years already, right? We've got a portfolio of companies that we've invested in. We have an established network. So where are all the LPs? And yet we're seeing other fund managers with no track record, very little experience, closing 50 million plus funds.
I don't know what that's about. Maybe I do.
Yeah, I'm not going to say it.
So Tevin, I was going to ask. I wouldn't let you answer, but I'm going to ask you a question as well, because did you raise? You've kind of generated success. All this. How did you raise funding? Like, how did you fund your business?
Yeah, I was just going to say something interesting. So I was actually in a meeting very recently, and what I was. It was with the British Business Bank. Gary, I know you know them. And one of the points that I was trying to say to them was that responsibility lies both ways. It's incumbent on fund managers to understand their perceived clients, and for us also to know what these guys expect. I think for a long time, what seems to have happened is that we've become this kind of group of people who we come up with these answers. They don't really bother to check and understand what. There's so many assumptions made about your business just by virtue of who you are, and I think we've got to find creative ways. And I'm now going to go back. So I said something to someone the other day. I said, look, if I was a Black business person. So ironically, my company is never viewed as a Black business. I'm not really sure why, but I said, if I was a Black business person, would you work for me? I said, you don't have to answer the question, but it's something I want you to think about. And the point I was trying to raise there was we all need to deal with the perception. So when I walk to you as a fund manager and I'm looking for fund, what other perceptions do you already have that you're not even sharing with me for me to dispel them? And that responsibility actually needs to start with fund managers. But it's not just fund managers. I think even banks. Not everybody is going to fund managers. There are many normal Joe blogs who are out there at retail banks looking for a very small amount of money. And they come back with no's, and more no's. But yet, the banks are there to loan money. That is their business. It's not a free business, not a charity. So the key here is that actually we need to start putting pressure on them also taking responsibility. It is incumbent on them to understand, okay, Tevin's brought a business. What do I need to understand about Tevin's business for me to be able to work with Tevin to give him the financing that he needs? So I think the conversation actually is a 360 conversation. And also, we need to start challenging them. We need to start asking the question, what is it you're not comfortable about? I had a meeting today. I finished all his questions. Then I started asking him questions. I want him to tell me everything he's not comfortable about so we can deal with it before I leave the room. Often what happens in meetings is that the equilibrium is so tilted. You go there, you're the ones begging for money. You're the one presenting everything. Everything is so against you that actually you don't even come out of that room being yourself. And what they need to be buying is yourself. So my key to people is we need to start challenging the status quo. Look, let's start asking fund managers, why shouldn't ImpactX raise 50 million in a month? This is a very unique business. This is a business that's solely focusing on social impact. But yet every single organization has an ESG pact. And so for me, my part is this, that we need to start challenging the status quo. We need to start asking, we need to start holding people responsible. Because if you don't hold them responsible, would the LPs understand the impact of these things?
And Tevin, I was going to say, how did you fund your business? Like, how did you?
So at the start, I'll go back a little bit. So the very early start, after I got turned down by the Prince's Trust, my very first one I started with. This is very funny actually. So back in those days, I don't know if they do it now. They give you a graduation credit card, and I used that credit card to start my business. And then after 1 week, I ran out of money. So I went. I know it wasn't a very clever idea, having financing for 1 week, but I went to the bank. But I think what I was able to sell to the bank was that I dispelled everything she was worried about. So I'll give an example. I talked about being from Southeast London. I talked about being young. I brought everything she was worried about to her, and I answered it. So that way, she didn't get a chance to not answer it and make up her own mind. I did that, okay, would you agree to the money? She said, look, what happened was, in truth, a lot of things that I was worried about, you kept giving me the answers to, and you put me into a situation that it was incumbent on me to look at how we could help you. Because I talked about it. I said, look, I'm from Southeast London. This is why I went to university. This is why I studied this. This is why I might not have experience for this. This is why. So I dealt with everything line for line to make her not feel uncomfortable. The challenge you have in this industry is that people feel uncomfortable, but they never tell you they feel uncomfortable. You come with an idea. They might not understand your business. But rather than say, do you know what, actually, as I don't understand your business, how are you going to help me help you so we can give you the money? They don't tell you that. They just automatically start to think, I'm not sure if this will make money. But actually, you're not reading the facts to know if it would make money or not. And for me, this is the challenge. So that was my very first rodeo. My second one to be honest, I'd become way more aggressive at that point because, we were already turning over a decent amount of millions. So I just went to the bank and said, look, I'm not here to negotiate. I know you're going to charge me for these loans. How do we work together for me to be able to get what I need? Because what I need will take me to this point. And actually, from my calculation, this is what I think you get back from all your fees through it. And I think I probably just created so many uncomfortable moments when I have these meetings that actually it forces people to say, okay, how do I get this also out of my room and give him what I think he wants? And I think for me, the key, I'm always challenging you so you feel just as uncomfortable as I'm supposed to feel. And I've never made the financing has never been the power for me. I'm the one that has to have sleepless nights. I'm the one that has to do 14, 18, 19, 20 hours. I'm the one that's putting everything on the line. I'm the one that's come up with the idea. So I've always gone into that room knowing that the equity balance for me, I'm always going to challenge. And I think, look, I don't say that everyone should try the same strategy as me, but I was very clear that finance is a business. You must turn. So my discussion them is very commercial, and I'm very astute in my commercial approach to them. So I'm never begging. I take no prisoners. I'm very, very assertive in my approach, and I think that's what's worked for me personally. I just don't know if, I'm in a different stage now where you can sit down and kind of negotiate these things. But even at the ages, I was just as assertive as I am now.
And what about you, as if someone came to you and they were kind of assertive like that, how would you respond? I mean, because one of the things I think is interesting is, again, looking at the UK versus the US, it's kind of like a lot more people in the US have been entrepreneurs themselves. So there's a little bit, I think, more empathy to like, this really sucks getting rejected all the time and never being told. Like, actually, one of my pet peeves is someone reading your deck for like 3 minutes and then telling you why you're not freaking Nostradamus and you've never done this yourself. Maybe have a little bit more respect. You know what I mean? So I want to hear from you, like, what do you think now that you're on the other side is the best way to approach investors, particularly when you know that they may not understand your business and for some reason they've convinced themselves that they're going to be able to figure it all out by reading it in 3 seconds or in 30 seconds or 3 minutes?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think we try to speak to as many people as possible, right? But we can't speak with everybody. We've got over 1,500 companies in our pipeline, and we probably speak to about 37% of them, right? And we've done 10 core investments out of that, so it gives you a sense of what the acceptance rate is. For us, it's less than 2%, right? So ultimately, I have to say no to a lot of people, right? It's just what it is, and it's almost worse when I have to say no because I'm the black investor. You're a black founder. You've got a great idea. Surely I should want to invest in it. If I say no, what does that say to other investors? Well, the black investors didn't want to invest in you guys, so why should we, right? So it's really difficult. So for me, I mean, I have a slightly different approach. For me, I try to give them the message that no is not no, no is not now, and maybe I don't understand your idea well enough, or maybe we're just not ready for this. And these are my thoughts around what you've presented. Now, if you can correct me on that over time, we can continue to have this conversation and we can grow on this journey. And maybe at some point we can come around the table. So the thing I tell founders is polite persistence, right? You don't get anywhere by being rude with investors. That just gets you out the door, right? Because I'll be honest, if I've got a founder being rude to me, I'm just like, I haven't got time for this. I don't have time for it, right? Because I know how hard I'm trying to support people.
Assertion has been rude?
No, there's assertiveness and politeness go hand in hand, right? You can be politely assertive and say, look, respectfully, I think you're wrong, and these are my reasons why, and this is the evidence we have to back it up, right?
Precisely.
I understand that you might not agree with that right now, but how about we stay in touch? Could I
Precisely.
continue to send updates? Could I meet you for coffee? Could you, right? And the thing about bias and prejudice, most of it, human beings work on a very simple concept, right? And that is repetition and familiarity breeds truth. Very simple. You tell the same lie to someone enough times, they will believe it eventually, right? Or they will at least give it time to, maybe this is true, I don't quite know. So you almost have to fight against that, because these people don't know us, they don't spend time with us. All they hear and see is the nonsense they get in the media or from their own families on a day-to-day basis. So an important thing is to build that level of familiarity with these investors, get out of our comfort zones, get to know more people. Gary is probably one of the most well-connected Black people I know, right? And I know he's still working hard to fundraise and the rest of it. But from my experience, this is the only way for us to do it until more people like us step up, right? And start investing. You know, where are all the sports stars? Where are, you know, the wealthy politicians? Where are the wealthy business owners? There are some very wealthy Black business owners out there, right? And here's the thing, they don't take the risk on us.
So as I was going to ask you that question though, I mean, you know, like I have been very public about the fact that I'm like super eager to go back to America, because I just feel like you do have more support from the community and you do have the wealth that's been created. And then, you know, someone pointed out to me, and I'm going to just put it out there. They said to me, you know, you're never going to succeed here because the thing that they are looking for is lineage. It's not talent. Right. So, you know, and then someone else said to me, okay, well, if you don't get invited to the weddings, like I know a lot of people, been to a lot of places, but they're like, if you don't get invited to the weddings, then you're not in, you know? So there's a group of people that they kind of like, they went to school together, they, you know, and those are the people I think ultimately they get funded, the ones that kind of believe that they're part of the same internal, you know, elite group. So I guess the question is, if I find it really frustrating because I'm like, okay, so even with all the stuff I think I've done, like you're still getting like junior analysts being like, no. And you're like, really? You know, even people who are like, used to be my interns now are like turning around being like, oh, we don't. So, but then on the other hand, I'm on the IC of another, you know, thing. And I'm seeing the sorts of companies that they think are like exciting. And it usually has to do with somehow or another, someone who's considered in has recommended that person. So how do you get past that? Because I guess the thing is like, if you're a founder, it doesn't even have to just be a Black founder. Like, because the next question is going to be if you're just from a founder from outside of London or from the wrong zip code or postal code, as you say here, how do you get in? Because if they're not inviting you to the weddings, what's the secret?
Yeah, you know, there is no easy answer to this question, right? Otherwise, we'd have all solved it by now. And that's the truth. That is the absolute truth. There are strategies that seem to be more effective than others, right? And, you know, finding great accelerator programs to go through seems to be a key one. Building strong angel networks. So Neyber raised over 200 million, right? None of that came from venture. None of it came from venture. It was angels, family offices, high net worth, right? And then a massive check came from an institution, which was Goldman, right? And largely that happened because of our lineage, as it were. You know, Martin, Monica, both ex-Goldman Sachs, right? So we were kind of 1 foot in. We weren't quite in, we weren't being invited to the weddings, but, you know, we might get invited to the after party, yeah? So there is an element of making sure you've got people around the table who can get you that invite, right? And it's surprising how many of those people are out there and are willing to, you know, lend a helping hand, but they just don't get asked. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to say I agree with you, as I think one of the other things that probably we just need to do a little bit more of it being very strategic when we're putting our board together. I think people often would do you a favor. So for example, if you've been invited to the wedding, but you know the person that gets invited to the wedding, or you know the guy that knows the guy that knows the guy that gets invited to the wedding, you put him on your board because then he can make the call and me can make the call and he can make the call. And I think one of the things that I don't think we do well is strategic enough
when our board composition is not strategic enough. This is not often people put people in their board that can knock doors. If you're going to
try and do a deal, you look at the right people you need to put on, because they would knock those doors. They would get invited to that wedding, and they would then say the things that you would have said if you went to the wedding. So I think actually, possibly that's probably one of the things that we should look at. How do you put together the right board? How do they, open the door for you, that one foot in that Ez is talking about? These are the things that I think actually, if we do that right at the start. Look, I know people that have raised money, and everyone has raised the money has been on their board. The founder itself could never raise the penny, but everyone else on the board were able to help him and raise the money. So I think actually putting the right composition of the right people together who may have that. Look, the problems that we have in this country, we can't fix in one day. I think what we have to do is be very clever in our approach on how we kind of, make things happen. The hope is we can slowly start to make a turn on it. And, Gary, if you take you, for example, America has, much longer history in terms of Black people than we do in the United Kingdom. So I think eventually we'll get there. I think what we need to start doing is, again, the people that Ez is talking about, there are very successful Black people or ethnic minority people in this country, but also approaching them. I'll give you an example. As I know many people in ImpactX, many. I speak to Eric all the time. Eric and I have had some conversation very recently, but no one's ever spoken to me. And I know many of the guys. So the thing sometimes is that we also need to start digging and looking, and we can't always follow we talk about people following the obvious, right? And you kind of I think you had an analogy, if someone lied to you so often, you start to believe it. But we also do it, because actually what happens is you go to the kind of usual suspects. And I know you guys have done yours slightly differently, but other people have done the same thing where they just go into the usual suspects. And is it time that actually we should start being very creative in our approach? We look at getting the right board people. We look at, looking at individuals. And there are many people who believe in what you guys are trying to do. There are many people who believe in what people are trying to do. But actually, there's no connection between the people trying to do it and the people who might be able to do something little that we can kind of grow to make sensible.
So, I mean, this is like a great segue then, because, the other day, again, I was talking to another person and they were like, oh, well, Indians have done so well. Of course, it was an Indian person. And they were like, oh, Indians have done so well. And I was like, so what do you think is the secret? And it's true, like both in the US and the UK. If you look at tech, I think the other day I was looking at it, and like, I think the Asian population in the US is like 4 or 5%. But then in terms of startup teams or founders or venture capital, it's like 18%. So like they're overweighted even more than, like, let's say, white people. So then people say, okay, well, it's not a race thing then, or kind of discrimination thing, because some groups are significantly overweighted and the Black group is always at the bottom. What do you think that's about? I mean, or what are the lessons that we can learn from other communities? The response I got from the Indian community, or the person that was, from the Indian community, was, well, they've stuck together. Like they really stick together. They really support each other. They really kind of understand. They do meetings and stuff like that. Kind of like you're saying, Tevin, like everyone's helping everyone else. What do you think the Black community needs to do so that it can start to replicate some of the success of the Indian community?
I think that's a really interesting point. And just on that, it's also in terms of tech leadership in Silicon Valley. We look at Twitter, we look at Microsoft. Who else? I think there are a couple of other big companies as well. Yeah. Google, they're all Indian directors who've been made MDs recently, actually. It's quite an incredible success story. But this is also why the BAME moniker is not helpful.
Doesn't work
in this country. It really isn't. And it was fascinating because I was supposed to be speaking with Kwasi Kwarteng just the other day, but unfortunately, as we know, there's a lot going on in government right now, so that talk didn't happen. But I was doing some research and I was looking up, the impact of COVID on Black businesses in the UK. When I typed the term impact on black business, COVID impact on black businesses, all I got were American hits, right? I didn't get anything on the US. BAME on all UK, right? Trying to understand exactly how our communities differ is a nice sleight of hand that's been performed in this country at the moment, right? There was a fantastic report by MSD UK about the impact of the top 100 BAME businesses in the UK. I think it was like 79 billion in economic value. But they did a top 100 list. And if you count, and they actually talked about the racial background of each one of those founders. Do you want to guess the number of black founders in that list? Top 100 BAME businesses?
Zero to
one. It was one. And it was Ishmael from World Remit, all right? And that's a business that's about to IPO, is the first unicorn in the UK, has revenues of over 90 million a year. That was the level you had. And I think he was EY's Entrepreneur of the Year globally, right?
Yeah.
That's the level we had to hit to get into that top 100 list of BAME businesses, not top 100 list of businesses in this country, right? There is a massive problem. And yet we know our community over-indexes when it comes to starting companies. And I saw a report in the US that talks about how founded startups, more than 50% of them are from black entrepreneurs, black female entrepreneurs, right? So when it comes to starting, we are all over it. But then there is a massive gap when it comes to getting to the next level. And that becomes part of the core challenge that we have to try to overcome.
We have 3 minutes. So one thing I was going to ask, and I'll ask maybe you, Tevin, just to get this one out, is, you know, sometimes I have to think about it myself. Like when I was in school, way back when in high school, they talked about something called rational divestment, which is that like, if there are no models of success that look like you, and even for the white people, it's like 0.05% are going to get venture funding. So you're like the unicorn of the unicorn. You're like the 0.024% of the 0.05%. I don't know what that number is. It's tiny. Why should black people give it a shot? Like, I mean, if you're being completely rational, it's irrational to be an entrepreneur, but it's even more irrational to be a black female entrepreneur. Like, it's just not going to happen, statistically speaking, right? Why should we still do it nonetheless?
Okay, so I think I'm just going to kind of connect to what I think Ez was saying. I think for me, the thing that you have with the Indians or the Asian community, I agree with the BAME moniker, by the way. I think over time they've created this kind of comfortability where actually perception is everything. So when they walk in and they've got a tech idea, someone's already thinking, do you know what, this might work. What do we need to do to try and get them in? And I think what we need to start doing is how do we, I'm a believer that the Rome wasn't built in a day. We're going to need to start. There can't be a coincidence that at the startup point, we're oversubscribed. Clearly what happens is we have the desire, we have the drive, we have the wants and the need. What then happens is we've got to push that journey up a bit more. And I think the moment you do that, what will start to happen, you were saying something as earlier that, and I'm going to repeat, if someone keeps lying, you eventually start to believe. When people start to see that positive black people with new ideas coming constantly. So I honestly don't think this is always a race issue. I think this is a bigger thing. I think it's a stereotype issue, which is why someone will say, well, actually, no, I wouldn't turn you down because you're black. It doesn't mean nothing. But actually, they connect because the stereotype overarching everything else that you think about when the guy walks in. Do you trust that this is a good idea? Do you trust that he can make this a good business? Do you trust that he can scale? Do you think he can make a unicorn? All these things are actually the things that you've already formed an opinion on. And I think the work we would probably need to start doing is how do we push that startup piece all the way up and just encourage more? And even if we get people started, you know, the work you guys are doing is incredible. Just getting people in there, because eventually the numbers get big enough that people start to think, well, I've seen 10 founders today, 4 of them are black, but actually 2 of them are amazing. The next time you see 5, the next time you see 7. And that's the point, because we're sitting here saying all these guys are Asian, but actually it started with 1. 1 did well, then people didn't feel away by appointing another person. Now you've got the biggest kind of tech or FinTech or anything else you want to call it in this new industry are pretty much Asians. And it's not abnormal to anybody because everyone's used to seeing these new ideas. So I think for me, we probably need to just kind of keep creating the ecosystem that we're working on, the work that you guys are doing. Unfortunately, I'm just a businessman and I'm just kind of thinking about this from a commercial perspective. But actually, the work you guys are doing with people like us supporting to push that dial from the start further up the chain so it becomes more and more that in this case, I would say we keep telling you the truth and eventually you believe us rather than a lie. I don't want to use the lie.
Well, I think we're just at time. So I'm going to ask, we had a conversation where we talked about a lot of the negatives and the challenges. Like, let's leave on an optimistic note. So do you think in 2020, what are we in now, 2022? Like, you're a founder starting a company in 2022. You're a Black founder, a female founder, a founder from any category that's underrepresented and stereotyped. What's your advice to them that should keep them going through the next 11 months? Let's start with Tevin.
I think for me, I would say that this will be the biggest decision you would ever make. The ride will be crazy like you've ever seen. Strap up, enjoy the ride, focus, believe what you're trying to do, accept that there will be a lot of no's. But in the middle of that no, there's always a yes. And what you have to do is focus on looking for your son. Just look for your yes and just keep going. But I believe 2022 will be a very interesting year for business people.
All right. And you, Ez, what are your parting words?
I'd say there is change happening, right? In the US, investments in Black founders have increased 4x in the last year. Now, 4 times a small number is still a small number, but it's an improvement, right? In the UK, we're seeing more funds like ours, and it feels like there's an inertia or momentum behind us now. And I think you're going to see more funds like ours actually raising over the course of this year. And if we look at what happened last year, we saw 2 Black unicorns, right? We've seen organizations like AudioMob raise a £110 million valuation. We've seen Mariam Jamo raised 3 million for her startup, right? We're seeing more and more people like us getting out there, being public about what we're doing. So there is change afoot, and it is slow, but we're pushing forwards for it. But please, 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 please do yourselves a favor. Do your research. Pick an industry which is fast growing, where there's strong interest by VCs. Make yourself as attractive as possible. Make it as hard as possible for them to say no, right? And let's just flood the market and do exactly what Tevin said. Let's make sure that if they see 10 people, 5 of them look like us, right? It makes it harder and harder for them to say no, because the more we tell them the truth, exactly as Tevin said, the more they'll start to believe it, right?
Words take us out. So thank you both very, very much. This has been a great chat right before Black History Month begins in a few days in the United States. So thank you for joining us. And yeah, I think that's it. So I'll turn it back over to Petar if he's still around.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, guys, for the wise words. And then thank you for everybody that joined us this evening. Thoroughly enjoyed this event. And we're now going to break out into the virtual networking. It's just on the top right corner. You can click, and then you can meet some new people in our community. And you can also meet our partners, Lewis Silking, who is a legal firm here in London, who can help you out if you have any legal questions. And huge thanks once again to our speakers. Take care and see you next month. Bye.
Right.